Out of all my work on 5th edition, I think nothing impacted me more than the structure of classes. When you get subclasses, when you can do more than cast 2 spells or swing a sword in a given day, where the ribbon abilities come in. You don't get much from your class, so planning ahead becomes pretty important, which means it's pretty important to me. Your decisions, how you plan ahead, is pretty important to me, the designer. But there is an exception. When y'all add another class. Suddenly, when y'all have the option to change your track of advancement, when you can waffle between the choice of killing 1 goblin or 5 and the trolley problem of your class, the game becomes a lot more dynamic. Howdy folks, Gelatinous Rube here. Welcome back to our 5th edition retrospective. Today's subject is multiclassing, the mechanic of combining different class features into one character. We'll go over the point of multiclassing in 5th edition, the quirks of doing it in this system, address folks who hate multiclassing in any edition, and finally, discuss my objections to this system, how I think it was handled in 5th edition, and my critiques. Now, people who like to multiclass do so for a few different reasons. I don't think, to be clear, any of the following reasons solely explains the urge. I think these really are compounding factors for why folks combine different character traditions. That being said, the primary benefit of multiclassing is obvious. Multiclass characters are awesome. In a world which increasingly demands talented people wear many hats, it sure does feel good to have a similar character fantasy rewarded in-game. Multiclass characters get to enjoy a breadth and depth of not just mechanical enjoyment, mechanical agency, unavailable to most 5th edition characters. Multiclassing allows you to craft a character with a far more coherent narrative and mechanical vision. If I want to play a spell sword or magic knight, pick your favorite title, my best option is not the Eldritch Knight subclass of 5th edition. My best option to feel cool, to have the mechanical resources to express agency and align my character with the fantasy the Eldritch Knight promises, is actually to mix separate materials. I should mix the Battlemaster Fighter with the Conjuration School Wizard, for instance. I get to combine class features intended to make fighting cool, with class features intended to make magic cool. 5th edition assumes both of these things are cool to begin with, and so it doesn't give the Eldritch Knight features to make either of those things cooler. It just lets you do both of them in the same turn under a list of restrictions longer than those of just fighting or just magic usually have to labor under. Adding to the cool factor is the idea classes are not real in setting. Let me clarify, this is not Destiny, where the players choose from Titans, if they're smart, or Hunters or Warlocks in character creation, and are referred to then as Titans, Hunters, or Warlocks in-game. Cleric is a mechanical overlay we use to explain your character's rough path of advancement through the game. Sometimes we do describe classes with natural language. We give them titles, we name them with natural language, that's true. But a commoner uses the terms soldier, fighter, warlord interchangeably. They're not referring to whether their buddy John uses action surge or sundering strike. They're referring to his profession. Multiclassing is a reminder that classes are born of the mechanics, not the narrative, and this little reminder is enforced on the mechanical layer of the game. A player who mixes, say, Cleric and Barbarian is not playing a Cleric/Barbarian like Cleric 3 Barbarian 5. They're playing a character whose god channels divine power to drive their servant into a fury, and lets them perform a few miracles in the process on the side. Finally, players can use multiclassing to fix underperforming content. Following from our last 2 motivations, let's imagine the game's designer made a bad class. Let's say they took the idea of a martial expert whose primary domain was the wilds, an ambush expert who studied specific types of enemies and environments to great effect, and the designers fumbled it. Well, multiclassing allows players to improve on the base material, or combine other material entirely to replicate the flavor or fantasy of bad material as best they can. You may not be able to play a ranger to your satisfaction in 5th edition, but reflavoring an Oath of Ancients Paladin and Fey Warlock pact might work for you. Mixing a druid with a fighter might see you more satisfied. Mixing any of the above with the ranger class in 5th edition can see you enjoy a character fantasy otherwise absent from the game. So multiclassing in 5th edition has 3, I think, main important categories for dividing up the various mechanics and what you actually gain from engaging it. First up is the class abilities gained from multiclassing. In 5th edition, multiclassing essentially just allows you to start at a new class from 1st level, subtracting from your overall available levels. No matter what class you originally progressed in, how high your current level is, you will always collect abilities from 1st level onwards in the new class. There is no way to change this. 5th edition compensates for this by keeping 1 or 2 more abilities than usual close to the class's starting levels. Next up is skill proficiencies and others. Multiclassing offers some additional proficiencies in armor, weapons, and skills whenever you multiclass. There's a pretty simple table explaining all of these. You can see them on screen now, but there's a second instance version, another set of proficiencies you get in a case that's not actually covered in the multiclass section directly. See, many subclasses provide you with additional proficiencies upon gaining them. This is relevant because in 5th edition, depending on your class, you can gain your subclass at 1st level, or sometimes 2nd level rather than 3rd. The most notable example is the Cleric, which often receives additional proficiencies from their specific domain. It's notable because these proficiencies can encompass heavy armor, or all simple and martial weapons, sets of proficiencies you normally have to start in a class in order to acquire. Look, they're not as common on that table we showed you earlier, but your deity is to some extent providing you with or accelerating your knowledge of these proficiencies. It made clerics and classes like it a prime target, both in the 5th edition PHB and, importantly, any similar future material WotC would have developed with multiclassing in mind. It threw off their design trajectory, it shifted it, once they realized what was happening at the very least. Finally, we have spells and spell slots. Spell slots are the one class feature that stack in a sense. If your character has levels in multiple classes with spell slots available to them, pact magic is excluded from this, those slots add up along a universal progression. Check out this table here. See, classes like wizards and sorcerers count for 1 level on the table for each level they have in, like wizard or sorcerer, because the table is actually just identical to the slot progression wizards and sorcerers already get. Along with bards, druids, y'all get the idea. Full casters, as we typically refer to them as. The levels of paladins and rangers, for instance, referred to as half casters across 5e's lifespan, count for half a level on the table. Finally, the Eldritch Knight and the Arcane Trickster subclasses, with a spell progression that was not iterated on anywhere for the entirety of 5th edition's lifespan, gain 1 level on the table for every 3 levels they collect in those subclasses. It's not really complicated, the book's pretty clear, there's just a little bit of bookkeeping whenever y'all gain a level, which is to be expected, that's the point of gaining levels. But while spell slots, I think, appropriately scale based on the idea there's some crossover between spellcasting traditions, your actual spells known are capped based on the individual spellcaster's levels. Y'all can probably tell already, just by my tone, that's going to pop up in my critique. 8 levels in Cleric may offer you the spell slots of a 10th level caster when considering your 4 levels in Ranger, but your Ranger spells known are capped, as if you've never learned anything else about magic. Now, I wanted to give folks a sense of some common critiques of multiclassing that are at odds with mine, built on different priors I don't subscribe to or really acknowledge. These are slightly more common from the OSR crowd, but to be honest, I've seen nearly as many of these criticisms from modern players, so here are some phrases or half-baked thoughts from folks who don't like the mechanic. But Rube, it just don't make sense for someone to get levels in a new class so all of a sudden. This is a fake objection that probably deserves its own video, but 5th edition specifically offers these weasels some cover. The way you explain multiclassing is fairly simple. In the character's off time, when they have a quiet moment to themselves, they train or practice. Maybe they even do so in combat or other stressful situations, just not well enough to produce a mechanically distinct effect, because that lies outside the rules, which again are a mechanical overlay for the character. They are not the character. You'd figure that the OSR would have an easier time with this concept. But in 5th edition, your character often has no extended period of downtime, and there's no training requirements for characters to level up. In other words, there's not a whole lot of time for your character to learn in the background. Lucky for us, we don't actually need that time. The regular classes, whatever your character already was, seems to level up just fine without all that extra time. Well, that's not fair. They've been training their entire life to swing a sword or cast magic. Doesn't matter. Your characters are not engaged in training. Your characters are beset constantly by threats which might kill them. There is no better environment for ingenuity and improvisation so long as it doesn't actually get you killed. On top of that, the broad strokes of most training probably resemble one another. Learning how to stay focused, stay calm in stressful situations is probably 80% of set training for pretty much all classes, so y'all can actually do the 20% unique to your specific character tradition. And how do you learn that other 20%? How does that come up in game? Well, by leveling up. Remember, your character suddenly goes from swinging their sword once in a round to swinging twice in a round. There's no intermediate progression because it's not important to how the game works. If it was important, single-class characters would use level training or a similar mechanic just like all of the multi-class characters would. This is just a nonsense end run for folks who don't like the new mechanics their players can use. It doesn't actually have anything to do with what they think the mechanics should represent in the narrative. Well, on the mechanical side, remember that we pointed out that the early levels of most classes are front-loaded. All of them have their subclasses by level 3, but plenty get them sooner than that. Isn't that a balance problem if a character multiclasses and suddenly gets a whole bunch of new features all of a sudden? Well, not really. Your character still only gets about 3 to 4 turns in a given combat, so offering additional actions doesn't really affect the character's power level all that much. It just increases their range of options in play. Those combats usually don't fully drain player resources either, so offering additional resources puts multiclassers a little ahead of the curve, but they're still at the end state of not having used everything that they had at their disposal, just like all of their regular single-class compatriots. And by the time you get to modifiers that you don't need to spend actions or resources on, your primary class has usually fallen behind. Remember, y'all won't get multi-attacks or higher level spells if you spend too many levels getting another class. The boost in effectiveness, this is the key here, the boost in effectiveness spikes briefly for a given level and seems notable on account of most classes not receiving new features when a given multiclasser chooses to take a new class. It seems so. To give an example, let's say that level 6 is a dead level for most of the players that you have at your table, but that's when the multiclasser decides to take a 1 level dip into Cleric. It seems out of the ordinary, but this is obviously a kind of survivor's bias. It balances out to about an extra important feature or two as the campaign stretches on, except for classes which have few features to begin with. But remember, 5e classes are already anemic. They should have plenty of features to begin with, and multiclassing shoring up bad class design is a feature, not a bug. We already went through that. So what did I think of multiclassing? I've gone through the design goals, I've gone through the ostensible benefits, the ostensible use cases for multiclassing writ large. How do I think it turned out in 5th edition? I think it was passably fine, but did not receive support past the original player's handbook, and it should have, as it became increasingly obvious that the class design in 5th edition was a hindrance, was dampening player creativity and options and range of choices at the table. Folks who wanted an advanced play style were being underserved by 5th edition, by WotC. They should have recognized that their obvious, right in front of their faces, option to shore up this problem was multiclassing, and they just never did anything with it. They just kept dropping the ball. They never fixed the fact that spell slots increase or stack on top of one another between different multiclass spellcasters, but spells known never seem to follow for reasons frankly incomprehensible to me. If a 10th level cleric multiclasses takes a 1 level dip into ranger, or maybe a 5 level dip into ranger, I'm not opposed to them getting a 3rd level or maybe even a 4th level ranger spell. It seems perfectly reasonable to me that there should be some crossover between different character traditions that have overlap according to the game's mechanics, should produce something that is maybe better than the original. In fact, I think that when you're designing a game like this, I think it should just be a given that players are gonna want a multiclass. They're cooler characters by definition. Why should they be punished for that? Why should they be disincentivized to do so? Who cares? If folks want to have a simpler play experience, they already have the PHB. Other people's fun does not need to be diminished. You'll hear this from me repeatedly. I maintain this design philosophy for as long as I can imagine and will continue to do so. Advanced play styles, advanced players do not need to be punished for their fun. The price of being basic is that you're not going to have as much fun as someone who puts more thought into it, and that's fine. That's okay. Your basic playstyle does not need to parasitize off of advanced playstyles. In fact, advanced playstyles can shore up where you might have a lack of attention or lack of mechanical rigor. That's fine. It's a benefit. It could be a symbiotic relationship. And in fact, I think most folks who prefer a basic playstyle think this way. They're grateful for the person at their table who knows how the mechanics work, who is good at crafting characters, who might even set up the basic player's character for them if they so desire. They're a resource in the party. They're a resource in the friend group to the experience to make everything more fun for everyone. So why didn't those advanced playstyles receive support from WotC? If the advanced players wanted it, and the basic players appreciated it in the spirit of cooperation and good gaming with their advanced brethren, why didn't they do it? I suspect, it's because the designers themselves were basic and didn't know how to do better. Well, folks, it's about time to head out. I highly appreciate y'all sticking around till the end of this video and joining me again for a 5e retrospective. It seems like between these and the old school rules you may have missed playlists, they're about even in terms of popularity. Sometimes the 5th edition one gets picked up in the algorithm a little bit more. That's just to be expected. 5th edition is still technically the current edition, even if it is dying and it's on its way out. Folks are still looking up rules, looking up monsters, looking up mechanics, and I think critical analysis like this has a strong overlap with the rules you may have missed. And if you're just seeing this for the first time, I highly recommend going over to Rules You May Have Missed. I think it'll offer you a lot of insight into tastes that you might not developed, that's the wrong phrase, tastes that you have but have not been able to recognize, that you have not been exposed to as of yet, that might be fulfilled by some rules from older game systems. Well, folks, it's about time to head out, but before I do, I just want to let you all know that Seven Willows, the Kickstarter that you folks funded, brought to life, for which I am eternally grateful, has, at the time of this recording, just 2 days left in its campaign. If you're interested, I suggest either follow it, you'll get a notification when we hit the 48-hour mark, or back it immediately. The art is by Star 2, the design is by me. I've hugely appreciated working on this project. It's been so invigorating to work on a zine, something that's small, condensed, meant to not go beyond 48 pages, just in a nice little saddle stitch cover. It's so much fun. And I hope you folks join me in the shared happiness and enjoyment of this particular game. I'll be running sessions in my server for quite a number of folks. And speaking of my server, you can hit the link down below. I think it should be in the comments by the time this video goes out. Go ahead and check out the link and you could join. Let me know that you came from my channel. I will give you the little beholder role, and it'll allow you to receive pings when new videos go out, and discussion channels are open for discussing the videos I make and others. Alright, for real now, thank you to Blue Dot Sessions for the music, and thank you to Mariana for the art. Peace.